Poll question for today's Anik Florian podcast. Who would you like to see Leon Edwards face in his next UFC welterweight title defense? And there's a lot of Bilal Muhammad noise out there. And obviously his interview on the Anik and Florian podcast YouTube channel and the clips on the DraftKings YouTube channel, our live conversation with Bilal Muhammad on Monday. 34% of you believe, well, I shouldn't say believe, or 34% of you would like to see Bilal Muhammad be the guy for Leon Edwards, 27% Colby Covington, 16% Hamzat Chimaev, and then 23% of you, the Gilbert Burns, Jorge Masvidal winner. Those guys are fighting less than 3 weeks from today. So our audience pretty split. And the reason why I included the name Hamzat Chimaev, Ken Flo, is because it's interesting. If Hamzat Chimaev was able and willing to make the championship weight right now, I do think they would put that fight back together between him and Leon Edwards. But, you know, I mean, Andreas Michael, his head coach, wanted Hamzat not all that long ago to be clear intentioned on a welterweight championship trajectory and have his whole life and focus be that. And obviously that's not the case. So I guess in some part, I would lead with the fact that it's disappointing that right now Chimaev is going to 85 and not willing to fight for the welterweight title, because I think that would be the fight. They scheduled it back in 2021 and Hamzat's still the fucking man.
He is. I think he matches up extremely well at 185 pounds. I think he could win the belt and retain the belt for far longer at 185 pounds than he would at 170 pounds, I think. But way better fights for him at 170 pounds. As far as, you know, selling fights, man, there are a plethora of options for the UFC and for Hamzat at 170 pounds. But I think he's probably tapping out to making that weight cut again and again and again. And the UFC, of course, wants a champion that's going to be able to do that repeatedly without hiccups.
Right.
And I don't know if that's long-term viable for someone like Hamzat. But yeah, this guy's exciting as hell, man. It's a shame because, again, so many great fights at 170, but at 185, there's a few of them out there that are very exciting and juicy.
We even talked about the long-term viability or lack thereof of Hamzat Chimaev winning the welterweight title and defending the belt repeatedly on Fight Island when he was all the rage way back when he had those 2 fights in a short amount of time. It just didn't seem realistic that he could make 70 repeatedly. Back to back to back. Cody's pissed. So our producer, Cody Merrow, is upset. So I know, and I understand this too. I'm just throwing the hypothetical before we get into all of the other relatively juicy stuff, right? The emotional stuff. I'm just talking about this because I find it interesting, right? That if it's about the championship, Hamzat Chimaev, he can make the weight. He has made the weight before. Right. But Cody's writing in the chat, Miss Weight basically told everyone to fuck off, ruined a pay-per-view headliner. Like, Cody's very upset.
Yes, so, Angry Cody's my favorite.
So Dana White has said that Hamzat Chimaev is moving to 185 pounds. So I don't think he's necessarily a part of that discussion. But both Hamzat Chimaev and Bilal Muhammad have come out and said that they've been offered the Colby Covington fight. And at least in Hamzat's case, he said that 4 times Colby turned that fight down. So it seems like promotionally, they tried to make what is a dream matchup for everybody, Hamzat versus Colby, for a long time. But as we do spin it forward for Leon Edwards, Dana White has essentially guaranteed that Colby Covington is going to be next. He was the fighter who did make the effort to go weigh in as the backup. I know Bilal Muhammad was more than willing and able to do that, but Colby was the guy whose number was called to make the weight as a backup. He made the weight. He looked fantastic. And whether it's because he moves the needle or whatever the reason is, Dana seems to want to make that fight. What are your thoughts on all that?
Yeah, it was a bit surprising when I saw that. But at the same time, I think Colby is a guy that moves the needle, right? I mean, this is a business and it's a fight game, but it's a business. And Colby is a guy that has been in a lot of big fights. He's a guy that you can always rely on to move forward, be aggressive, and bring the fight to that guy across from him. And for that, it does make sense. A bit of a head scratcher for me but there's so many guys out there that have a ton of momentum. They certainly have their arguments, right? You have Bilal, you have Shavkat, of course, Hamzat now at 185. But, I think that, Colby is a guy that people want to see either win or lose. And he's going to make a fight and he's going to know how to promote that fight. And if you're going against someone like Leon, who lets his fighting do the talking, he's very quiet. You need someone like a Colby Covington to help push that fight, in my opinion.
So there are a lot of champions who want to lead the conversation and call out their next challenger. We've seen Israel Adesanya do it essentially every step of the way. And for Izzy, as you well know, every single time he has called out essentially the number one contender or the scariest guy, right? He's calling for Yoel Romero. He's calling for Cannonier when he's clearly the number one contender. There are myriad other examples of Adesanya always calling Paulo Costa, right? When he looked like the fucking boogeyman, you know? So Leon Edwards does not seem to want to give this fight to Colby Covington because of the inactivity. And, you know, Belal Muhammad, 6 wins since the start of 2020, just 2 for Colby. You know, going back to the start of 2019, 4 years, 10 fights for Belal Muhammad, just 5 for Colby Covington. Obviously, Colby Covington got 2 opportunities against Kamaru Usman. And now that Leon Edwards is the champion, seemingly he's going to get a 3rd opportunity. It's a really difficult thing for Belal to digest with his 8-fight winning streak, with his history against Leon Edwards. And it kind of is what it is. You know, there are a lot of different factors when it comes to who gets a title fight. But what are your thoughts? And I know it's a hard question. It's certainly difficult desert land for me as a UFC commentator. But what are your thoughts on the fact that Leon Edwards doesn't seem to want to give Colby this opportunity right now?
Yeah, I think that he probably feels that Colby doesn't deserve it. I think in his head, he probably wanted somebody else. Colby's a big name in the sport. I think that the other thing you could argue for Colby's sake is Belal on a tremendous win streak. That absolutely matters. And it's extremely difficult to do that in the UFC. That's insane. However, if we were to compare, I guess the level of competition, you could certainly argue that the Colby's level of competition is higher than Belal's, right? I mean, let's look at competition. And, prior to him getting, the eye poke against Leon Edwards.
Yeah.
I love Belal, and I think it would be a very different fight, but things weren't exactly going well for Belal up until that point, right?
Yeah. I mean, it was one of the more devastating eye pokes that I have seen, and I sort of hate that a shortened main event that he took on 3 weeks' notice, replacing Hamzat Chimaev, would be used against him, right? It's the only time Belal hasn't lost in 4 years. It was a no contest, and he took the fight on 3 weeks' notice for 5 rounds in a main event, filling in for Hamzat. Yeah, I mean, I do think that history is used against him, which I think is unfortunate, but I don't necessarily think it's fair the way his wins are denigrated. He has beat Damian Maia. He beat Stephen Wonderboy Thompson. He beat the undefeated Sean Brady. Even Curtis Millender back in the day was somebody that people thought highly of. He beat Vicente Luque when Luque was in the top 5 before other people beat Vicente Luque. I just think maybe people don't necessarily like his style or his verbal or whatever the fuck. But, as I sort of said on the post show, I don't state his case or his candidacy because he has a podcast on our old channel, right? Or with my twin brother, right? Like I think in a true meritocracy, right? If this was a tournament, this is a no contest in terms of who's the number one contender.
Yeah, again, but the thing is, this sport has been built on anything but that. That's not been the case, unfortunately, for better or worse. So much of it has to do with name recognition, who the fans want, who talks more trash. And that's just the unfortunate reality. But yeah, you look at the numbers, what he's done. Belal has done everything possible to be in that spot right now. And does he deserve it? Absolutely. But that is always open to interpretation when you have an organization that is looking at other factors besides numbers.
Yeah. Now, let me say this as well. Colby Covington is must-see television. Now, I can't speak to his inactivity or fights that he has been offered or turned down or opportunities on The Ultimate Fighter. That is out of my lane. But yes, seeing him fight Leon Edwards gets me very excited promotionally as a commentator. And I do believe that he does have some merit, as far as his strength of schedule. The fact that Kamaru Usman is the only guy to beat him, the nature of some of his wins, does have the win over Masvidal, even though it was a long time ago. And that's a relevant win. We'll see what happens.